Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain, back with part 2 of our Legend of Korra closer look, finally. Before we delve into the second half of the plot and what it all signifies, I wanted to discuss the first half in a bit more detail, as well as ways it could have improved, since all of that directly ties into my final thoughts on Amon and his revolution. The first half of the Book of Air tries to be a hell of a lot of things all at once. Some of it works, but some of it doesn't. Firstly, the pacing is a sizable issue until the show finally calms down and remembers to breathe. When that happens, you start to see Korra at its very best. I promise that these videos, assuming enough of you want me to keep making them, will not be overly focused on why The Last Airbender did it better. In my opinion, the shows are different enough to warrant skipping a lot of direct comparisons anyway, even though some of that is unavoidable, like right now. Think about the first 2 episodes of The Last Airbender. Think about how methodically it paces itself, to the point where all we really know after 44-ish minutes is that these 2 are siblings, he's the Avatar, and this teenager with the scar really wants him captured. We learn about the characters involved in such a patient way, so their development feels natural. But in Korra, what you have is at least 5 different plot points flying at you in the same time frame, very few of which even possess much depth once Book 1 ends. And yes, in a way, that does kind of work, since Republic City is a faster-paced area than any place Aang and friends ever traveled to. But it didn't have to be, and because it is, we're left with a lot of important things being told to us, but very few of those same things ever being shown to us meaningfully, if at all. Best example, the camaraderie, or lack thereof, between benders and non-benders. We're told that this is a problem, and plenty of people beyond Amon apparently believe it, but it's rarely ever shown to be an issue, beyond the triads. Amon made it clear that he's not interested in justice, only the elimination of bending. But bending doesn't oppress people. People oppress people. And when they do, Beifong and her crew, noteworthy for being elite benders themselves, lock them up whether they have supernatural powers or not. We're also told that pro-bending brings the city together. That's great, except the only reactions to pro-bending we ever get are from the main characters or from the fabulous announcer. We never actually experience different people coming together because of pro-bending. So while Bolin's sentiment is probably true on some level, the show never actually does anything with it. Same with the homeless bunch. Once more, we're told that benders and non-benders live together harmoniously. That implies that a lot of the city's economically downtrodden benders could potentially work for the triads or form their own gang and fight their way into fancier living, kind of like the fabulous Bending brothers, but choose not to, because that would be an abuse of their powers, which, again, fellow benders will punish you for. Sadly though, it only ever really rises to the level of implication. When it really comes down to it, neither the protagonist nor the antagonist position is held up by much outside of he said, they said. But with a slower, more expansive story, you open up the world a bit more. Episode 1 could have been dedicated to Korra experiencing all of the best parts of the city. We all know that Tenzin will eventually end up training her anyways, because why wouldn't he? So instead of this odd fabricated hurdle of him not being able to stay Southside, just have him offer to house her right away. She can announce herself as the new Avatar almost as soon as she's there, and, as a direct result, would experience this grand utopia of a city as any celebrity would. But every now and then, something odd happens in the backdrop. Maybe a weird look or an unpleasant person scoping out the area. But Korra just brushes that off initially because big city living. And when we're not focusing on Korra, focus on this supposed discord between the benders and non-benders. It doesn't even have to be exclusively criminals. In fact, it really shouldn't be if nuance is the goal here. Make it so the wolf bats appear early on, demanding to eat for free because they are bending elites. Cliché, maybe, but now you properly set them up as champs who would cheat to win. Not only that, but now we have layers to this bending backlash that goes well beyond the obvious bad guys. And maybe Tenzin attends a meeting where that very thing is up for discussion. It's more believable than ignoring the rising anti-bending sentiment simply because Amon isn't considered a threat yet. And from there, episode 2 could be about Korra trying to find airbending balance while slowly uncovering the seedy underbelly of this once magical city. And then she starts to realize that, hey, maybe this city is a little unbalanced, just like her presently. Maybe there are people who take advantage of their gifts to abuse other people. And maybe, just maybe, a few officers not named Beifong, because she obviously wouldn't even consider it, go a little bit easier on earthbending thugs since brotherhood and all that. This would be a much better, much more interesting way to sell Amon's point. Learning all of this naturally frustrates Korra, who tries to take out her airbending failures on the city goons, but keeps messing things up because, well, rookie avatar. Now we get Beifong, and at some point later, we see the other side of the coin, pro-bending as a means of bringing people of all ilks together. The episode would end on this brilliant scene of everyone cheering and excited while they enter the stadium. Seeing that play out reminds Korra of what the city should be. So the captivated Korra ventures inside, despite Tenzin's wishes. Then cut to episode 3, where we open with the Bending brothers, who, instead of living by themselves, have to live amongst fellow benders and non-benders alike, who idolize their hard-knock spirit. The rest of the season can more or less run as is, except slower. But now, what you have is a real ideological debate with arguments on both sides and not just empty words. Now, let's jump into the second half of the plot, the first episode of which is unfittingly titled Aftermath. Since this so-called aftermath is half filler and half hurriedly moved along gotcha moment about the anti-bending sentiment Hiroshi Sato also clings to, it's not bad really, but it feels like a bit much when we're expected to just accept how well calculated all of Hiroshi's plans had to have been up until that point, only to get unmasked because of Ace Detective Korra's rather dubious intuitions. This just would have made a lot more sense as a Mako thing, since he's the one who eventually does become a detective, which would also make more sense as a potential point of conflict than whatever the hell was actually going on with him and Asami during this arc. And then there's Tarlok, a man so unbelievably absurd in his approach towards law enforcement that he never once takes 2 seconds to think, hey, wait a minute now, if I oppress the non-benders, then I'd be oppressing the non-benders. Oh no! And yeah, trust me, making sense ain't exactly a huge part of the family mandate here, a connection we learn by way of the history lessons parsed out over the next 3 episodes. Turns out, Aang once took down this bad dude named Yakon, who then traveled south, started a family, and raised Tarlok and younger Amon to be killing machines. Certainly a novel take on Water Tribe siblings, if nothing else. But let's not let this distract us from probably the best episode of the season in Turning Point, in where the Equalist offensive finally comes to a head. Everything in the city is quickly falling apart, and with it comes the best action scenes in this book. All of this is capped off by Lin Beifong stealing the episode, if not the show by this point, in an agreement with Tenzin that feels like real adults putting their baggage on hold because airships. We get the chief ripping through said ships single-handedly because, and Milo puts it best, that lady is my hero. And also, Dante Bosco because, honestly, who doesn't love hearing that voice? It's just a shame we don't get anything more substantial from him or the New Age Fire Nation, especially considering that every other bending nation got to be heavily represented in Korra's narrative, for better or worse. And maybe it's just me, but I would have gladly taken a closer look at the ways and means Fire Lord Azumi went about reshaping the once evil nation after Zuko retires over every family's got one of those, am I right? Any day of the week. Getting back on topic, in between Iroh Jr. making fanboys like myself squeal, Skeletons in the Closet leaves one to scratch their head while asking the basic question. What exactly is Amon's motivation? Let's break it all down and see if we can't figure it out. So before the god-tier VA known as Steve Blum got a hold of him, Amon was known as simply Noatak. He was a natural with waterbending and picked up bloodbending just as easily, in direct contrast to brother Tarlok. Eventually, he grows tired of his father's bullying and wants his brother to join him in running away. So now he's got to hang up about people with bending powers, but especially the Avatar. Fast forward to present day, and he's created this hokey socio-political stance that an alarming amount of people just buy into. Presumably, the same people that forgot that none of them would even be alive if Lord knows how many Earth Nation soldiers didn't die fighting the 100-Year War. But Amon's lying about everything else, for some reason, so why not fudge the truth about that too? What it all comes down to is this. Amon resents his father either for being a bully, being weak, losing to the Avatar who's actually strong, or some possibly chimeric combination of the three. So his plan is to eliminate all bending so that everyone can be just like his father? Let's keep in mind that this is his only frame of reference for what it looks like when bending goes bye-bye. A sad, shell of himself old man still hung up about his glory days. This is apparently what Noatuk wants the world to be. All that without yet touching on his own bending. Is he actually fueled by self-hatred, forcing him to reinvent his own life story for the sake of his cause and sanity? Or is he such a sociopath that along the way, he became completely unaware of his own hypocrisy? Or perhaps he actually did have some horrible encounters with unpleasant benders in between the South Pole and Republic City. And if so, why just pretend to be Zuko 2.0? Do what your so-called weak brother did and commit to the bit. But then, the second Korra can finally airbend, Amon dips, content with abandoning his cause and any semblance of dedication to it in favor of acting like he didn't assault the man he knew was his brother. And that's really what it comes down to with Amon. He's nothing but well-delivered words. Nothing about this show, and very little about the last show, supports his nonsense except when Tarlok gets baited into curfew enforcement, and nothing about Amon's backstory lends itself to easily connecting any dots between his motivations and the experiences that drove him to this point, making him the opposite of Kuvira on that level, who is a fantastic character. Maybe Amon was only ever supposed to be a mask, but that sort of takes away from the fact that a legitimate movement was created under him. A movement filled with real people who perhaps did have some actual bad run-ins with benders now that evil magic user isn't exclusively shorthand for Fire Nation soldier. But oddly enough, it seems that everything else about the Legend of Korra does more to support Amon's case than anything Amon himself ever did. Every main antagonist after him is a bender looking to reshape the world as they see fit through the power of their abilities. Kuvira is literally oppressing people down the line, and yet the anti-bending sentiment vanishes just as easily as Amon. Amon could have been a much better character under different circumstances, someone who could legitimately challenge the bending hierarchy and point to the real problems it caused. This is why I feel he should have been the last antagonist, not the first. He could have been someone who's always hated benders for one reason or another, but couldn't do anything about it until, you guessed it, harmonic convergence. From there, all he would have to really do is say, you see, look at what he did, look at what she did, heck, the Avatar turned Republic City into a damn rainforest. Trust me instead. Point taken, character inconsistencies solved. And this would work especially well juxtaposed against Korra, because her story is all about struggling with figuring out the correct thing to do in this complex world. It's like Aang's moral struggle with confronting the Fire Lord, except this time it's in every single book. And facing the question of how much this power of theirs actually corrupts the people who wield it feels like the ultimate series send-off. And while the obvious answer to such a question would be, well, it depends on which side of the Roku Sozin debate you were on, it could also prompt the new Team Avatar to ask, what more can I do as a person and not necessarily as a bender? All in all, I mostly did enjoy the Book of Air, but it is far from perfect, and further still from a fully fleshed out tale. And it's almost too easy and kind of tragic to tell how much of a limbo Nick put them in with regards to if and how the series would continue, while it was airing. Between wonky release cycles, budget cuts, and who even knows what else, the network itself should shoulder a fair chunk of the blame here. But even with that crutch, once the writers got back into their groove, the narrative they were going for became a lot stronger before returning to greatness post-harmonic convergence. And even here, you can see those strong points seep through every now and then. While incomplete in execution, the bending arena was well utilized as a means for both character growth and for making a statement on the city. Korra herself is among my favorite parts of this show, and choice moments here speak to why. Seeing her struggles, her frustrations, it all felt so palpable and real, because this world she's expected to balance really is nothing like the world of old. It's no longer us versus them, a battlefield she'd likely do very, very well on. Every threat she faces isn't as simple as bad guy wants to take over the world. So Korra's biggest challenge isn't fighting her way through things, but figuring out the ideal way to fight any given battle, be it a physical one or otherwise. For all the ways this tale might fall short of its predecessor, this ain't one of them. And we'll continue discussing those ideas once we take a closer look at the Book of Spirits down the line. And until then, thanks for watching.